Some of the moments I thought were the biggest setbacks in my life ended up shaping everything that came after, and it was honestly for the best, but at the time, it did not feel like growth. It didn't feel exciting, it didn't feel clear, and it definitely didn't feel like success. Most of those moments actually showed up as things not working. Plans falling apart, businesses having to be dissolved after years of work, or times where I had to sit with uncertainty much longer than I wanted to. I eventually thought those moments meant that I was behind, that I had chosen to focus on the wrong thing and wasted time or missed something that everyone else understood. I'd spent time ruminating on the past, and there were times where it really affected me mentally. But looking back, I can see that those were the moments that actually shaped me the most. Not when things were easy, not when everything made sense, but when I had to slow down, get really honest with myself, and figure out what to do next. So if you're in a season where something hasn't gone the way you planned, this isn't about pretending it's not hard, that it doesn't hurt, or forcing positivity. It's about understanding what those moments are actually doing for you. Because a lot of the time, what feels like a setback is usually the start of something that's going to be great. You just can't see it yet. And this isn't just personal. If people had stopped the first time things didn't work out, so much of what we take for granted wouldn't exist today. Colonel Sanders was turned down hundreds of times before anyone said yes to what's now KFC. Thomas Edison tested thousands of versions before the light bulb actually worked, and James Dyson built over 5,000 failed prototypes before creating the vacuum that we all know of today. None of those moments looked like success while they were happening. They looked like failure, like wasted time, like signs to quit, but they weren't wrong turns. They were all part of the process. A big reason failure feels so heavy is because of how we're conditioned to see it. From the time we start school, we're taught that mistakes mean you didn't get it right. There's a correct answer, a wrong answer, and one way to do things, and there's not much space in between. We're penalized for anything less than average, so we learn early on that being wrong is something to avoid. It's not something that actually is a part of learning. And then you layer society on top of that. We reward stability, we praise certainty, we're taught to choose the safest option, stick with it, and anything that falls outside of that, trying something new, building something from scratch, taking a risk, is often seen as irresponsible. I remember when I first started working on some of my business ideas and I was told to just get a real job. And I don't think that was said to be cruel, it was said out of conditioning and honestly care from their point of view, because we're taught that safety equals success and uncertainty means that you're doing something wrong. And then you add social media into the mix. We're constantly showing people at the finish line. The launch, the announcement, the capital raise, the moment it finally worked. But we almost never see the ideas that didn't pan out, the versions that had to be scrapped, the years where nothing looked impressive, the setbacks, breakups, and heartbreaks. So when something in your life doesn't work out, it can feel incredibly isolating, like you're the only one in the messy part while everyone else is moving forward. But failure isn't rare. It's universal. It's part of life and this whole human experience. It's just usually hidden. People don't usually shout from the rooftops when they fail. But most people you admire didn't move in a path that was straightforward. They had setbacks. They questioned themselves. They had moments where they didn't know if what they were doing would work or how to even move forward. We just don't see that part. And when you remember that, failure stops feeling like a personal flaw and it starts to feel like a normal part of choosing a more intentional life where you've actually tried something. One of the biggest shifts for me was realizing that failure isn't defeat, it's information. When something doesn't work, it's easy to focus only on the outcome, but what's actually more valuable is what gets revealed along the way. For example, I once started building a business that on paper made sense. I put a lot of time and energy into it. I even pitched investors on it. But after a while, I realized something important. It wasn't actually in alignment with me. It wasn't a company I could see myself pushing through when things got hard. There wasn't enough purpose there for me to stay connected during the lows, and that wasn't something I realized at the beginning. And even though the business didn't work out the way I expected initially, I did learn a lot about myself in the process. I learned a lot about my resilience. I learned that I could commit and follow through, and that even though I'm not naturally a tech person, I could still figure out how to build a marketplace from the ground up. That experience gave me data on my strengths, my weaknesses, data I can carry into whatever I build next. One thing to remember is that most people don't fail because they never actually try. They stay in ideas, they stay in planning, they stay in almost, or they just stay in comfort on autopilot. And a lot of that comes down to fear. Not fear of failing quietly, but fear of being seen failing. Because trying means putting yourself out there. It means letting people see you before you feel ready. It means being judged, misunderstood, or questioned. So instead, a lot of people hide. They hide their ideas, they hide their capabilities, they hide parts of themselves that actually want more. At first, it feels protective, but over time, it actually is a blockage. And when you finally move through that, when you do the uncomfortable thing and show up anyway, you start to realize something important. You weren't being held back by circumstances, You are actually being held back by fear. And the moment that you push past that, growth becomes possible again. Because growth doesn't come from staying comfortable, it comes from doing the thing that stretches you, even when it's awkward or uncertain. Trying is not easy, but not trying has a way of quietly shrinking your life. And that's why, even when something doesn't work, there's value in knowing that you showed up and you gave it an honest attempt. And you worked through blockages you might not have even known were there until you overcome them. Because once you've tried, really tried, you stop wondering if you could have done it because you know that you did. Confidence doesn't come from things going smoothly, it comes from surviving moments that didn't go the way you hoped and realizing you're still standing. Resilience isn't something you're born with, it's something you build by moving through discomfort instead of avoiding it. Every time you stay with something when it's hard, when motivation drops, when doubt creeps in, you're shaping how you see yourself. Failure builds identity, not the identity of someone who failed, but the identity of someone who knows they can handle uncertainty, pressure, and setbacks. And that matters more than people realize. Because a lot of people don't quit because they aren't capable, they quit because the discomfort challenges how they see themselves. It's the moment when effort stops feeling exciting, when progress slows, when the external validation disappears. That's usually where the breakthrough would have been, but it's also where many people choose to walk away. Resilience is staying long enough to let yourself change, not just your results, but your capacity, your patience, and your self trust. And once you've built that kind of resilience, confidence stops being something you wait for, it becomes something that you carry. Another thing about failure is that it has a way of humbling you. Not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, grounding way. I've had tons of ideas that I thought were great, and boy, was I humbled. It humbles your ego, your expectations, shows you where you may have been rushing, assuming, or skipping steps. When something doesn't work, you're forced to slow down and take an honest look at how you're moving. Your strategy, your habits, your mindset. It's not from a place of self criticism, but from clarity. A lot of times, failure isn't saying you're not capable, it's pointing out where something isn't aligned yet. Maybe the timeline was unrealistic, maybe the approach needed refining, maybe the foundation wasn't strong enough to support the outcome that you wanted. And even though that can be uncomfortable to face, it's also incredibly valuable because clarity often comes after something falls apart. Not because a collapse was necessary, but because it removes what wasn't sustainable. Failure gets rid of the noise and it shows you what actually matters and what doesn't. And once that honesty sets in, you're able to rebuild, not from ego, but from intention. Fear loses power after you've lived through the experience, but fear has a lot of power when it's theoretical. When you haven't tried yet, fear gets to imagine worst case scenarios. It tells you about what might happen, what people might think, what it might mean if things don't work out. But once you've actually lived through failure, something shifts. Fear loses its authority because now it's not a question anymore. You've felt the disappointment, you've navigated the uncertainty, and you've realized that you can survive it. So the question quietly changes. You stop asking, what if I fail? And you start asking, what if I don't try at all? Because you know regret is heavy. And grieving not trying is painful. And that's a very different place to move from. Because now fear isn't running the show, experiences. And of course, you want experience in this life. So you're no longer protecting yourself from something imagined. You're moving forward with proof that you can adapt, recover, and that one outcome doesn't define you. And that's when fear stops being a stop sign and starts becoming information that you can move with instead of against. One thing that's easy to forget is that every success you admire has a lot of unseen failure behind it. Not dramatic failure, but quiet moments of doubt, redirection, and trying again. Most of that never gets shared, but it's there. Failure doesn't mean you're behind, it doesn't mean that you missed your chance. More often than not, it actually means you're engaged with your life, you're making choices, you're responding, and that you're learning as you go, and that you actually tried, and that matters. A life without failure usually isn't a life without mistakes, it's a life without risk. So if things haven't worked out the way that you thought they would, it doesn't erase your effort or your growth. It just means you're still in the process, still growing, and one step closer to achieving your next thing with more wisdom, clarity, and discernment. And nothing about that says failure. I'm going to be doing weekly reflections like this here, so if you've enjoyed, I hope that you will stick around for the next one.